This adaptation of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's 5 stages of grief adds some useful nuances to the model that helps us understand what our staff goes through when we introduce and implement, and sometimes inflict, change in an organization. The model was originally introduced in the context of an individual being diagnosed with a terminal illness. However, the emotions we go through in that type of scenario are similar to those we experience with any change, almost regardless of the magnitude of the change. Let's go through the slightly modified model from the perspective of an employee whose job is about to be changed. We start at the point of stability. Everything is moving along fine, and we're comfortable in our situation. Then a change is announced. If there has been little or no warning of a change that directly affects us, all hell breaks loose in our emotional frame, and we stream through the grief curve. Our first emotional response is immobilization. We feel some fear, confusion, and may even be overwhelmed by our thoughts around the potential impact of this change. After composing ourselves a bit, we move to denial. We reject the notion that this change is really going to affect us, and we may move into declaring that the way we've been doing this is just fine. There's no need to change it. As the change initiative moves forward relentlessly, we move to some form of anger. This is our effort to regain control over our environment. It may manifest itself in passive aggression or more vocal complaints to those in authority or anyone else who will listen. Our emotional response is now at its most intense, and the adrenaline could really be pumping. The anger subsides a bit, and we still see the change continuing. We move into bargaining, trying to minimize the impact of the change and identifying things we might be able to hold on to in our familiar past. This could mean doing at least part of the job in the same way as before, or incompletely adopting the proposed way of doing things. When this bargaining just doesn't work, we move into depression. This is the deepest emotional valley we will experience. We feel deeply the frustration and sense of loss of the way things were. By and large, we are all naturally resilient beings. At some point, we move out of depression and into the next stage of testing. We begin to try new options to see if we can somehow make the new way work for us. Making some headway, we move to unenthusiastic acceptance. We begin accommodating the change while still viewing it as a negative. Finally, we reach positive acceptance, in which we realize some, if not all, of the benefit in the new way of doing things. You can see how, generally, we move through 3 themes: not me, why me, and finally, how me. Depending on the nature of the change with respect to the individual in question, the speed and depth with which we go through this flying W will be different. It's important to remember that we cannot force the process. It must be allowed to run its course. Otherwise, it will take longer for the affected individuals to adopt and adapt the new way. There are things we can do to help the process. The first suggestion comes from the highly useful little book by Roger Fisher and William Ury, Getting to Yes. It's the broken record technique, and we season it with a high level of tolerance and empathy. As a leader in the organization responsible for implementing all or part of a change initiative, we need to keep our eye on the prize and continue, like a broken record, to state repeatedly that we are implementing the change. The way this normally plays out is that when a staff member comes to us in one of the early stages of the grief curve and complains in some form about the change, we respond with something along the lines of, "Hey, I hear you, and I understand your concern, and we are implementing the change." Note that empathy without the broken record only gives the complainant encouragement to resist the change. On the other end, the broken record without empathy is just insensitive and brutal. The second thought derives from a couple of quotes on change. Alan Mogensen, the major driver of work simplification in the 1930s, observed that people don't resist change, they resist being changed. Or, as Harvard's Rosabeth Moss-Kanter coined some 50 years later, change is a problem when it's done to me, it's an opportunity when it's done by me. So, when you're implementing change, think about how you're going to get people involved in some aspect of the design of the change. At minimum, this is at the local and personal implementation of the initiative. I cover one way of dealing with this aspect of change in a one-pager called Gaining Support for Change. It's a neat and useful little framework based on some work done by Peter Keene, the internationally known consultant who's been recognized as the father of decision support systems. You can find it in the Resource Center section on the CYOR website under Thought Pieces. Looking at another fast frame, the one on the change curve that deals with organizational performance over time when a change is introduced, we can map the individual's emotional response against performance. Keep this in mind and notice the emotions along with the performance as you're managing the change initiative. The message: Understand that this cycle happens, that it's normal, and plan for it in the change. Think about how you're going to engage each and every individual impacted to be the creators of their own change.